This is the Truth Network.
Hidden treasures of the 119th Psalm. How amazingly fun we get to do the miracle verse in the Zadok section, or the Zadok letter in the 119th Psalm. So this would be the 8th verse. And as we've talked about, you get to 7 anointings, and then it just pushes over to this unbelievable miracle of the letter Zadok. And I think you'll see that completely in this verse, like, oh my goodness. And we all need this miracle. And so I get to share it today. How fun. So it is verse 144 in the 119th Psalm, and it says, "The righteousness of thy testimonies is everlasting. Give me understanding, and I shall live." Like, wow. What this verse has in store is absolutely unbelievable. And one of the really, really neat things, again, every verse in the Zadok section is going to start with this idea of righteousness. And so, or the letter Zadok, which is the righteous one, or righteousness. And so as we get the righteousness of thy testimonies is everlasting, the psalmist is going to this idea of the tree of life. I mean, it's really where he gets, because that word everlasting is the word that you might remember that God was concerned in the garden that Adam would take hold of the tree of life and live forever. Well, that's the word. That word is right there in that word everlasting. And the idea of the tree of life has everything to do with the letter Zadok, because the word tree is just an ayin, which we studied that not long ago, and then this Zadok. And so the idea of righteousness, of a tree and righteousness, very much go together, as we all are going to be made right on a tree, on the tree of life, literally to an extent being the cross. I mean, it just is. I don't know how to put it other than that. It's just like, wow. And if we can understand that story, the testimonies is something that we're an eyewitness to. And so as we see all the Gospels, what were they an eyewitness to? They were eyewitness of Christ dying on that tree, and thy righteousness is everlasting. And if we have understanding that he died for us, right, we're going to live. And so as I studied this verse, I came across this idea, like, oh my goodness, and I didn't want you to miss this, that word live at the end of this verse, I probably should have used that word in one of the 10 words, because that word is actually repeated 16 times. And so it's kind of cool that today, as we release this podcast, it's on March 16th. And so here's the word that is going to be repeated 16 times. Of course, it's going to get repeated a lot more in the Reish, but it has to do with the idea of live. And so what I thought would be fun in today's episode is just to go and review all these places where the psalmist is asking to live. Now, often in the psalm, it is translated as the word quicken. But it's the same idea, and it is, believe me, very much the idea of the tree of life. That if we have understanding, we can live. So let me just review with you all the places in the 119th Psalm that this word is used. So starting in verse 17, it says, which are in the Gimel section, it says, "Deal bountifully with thy servant, that I may live and keep thy word." Then in the Dalet section, it's the 25th verse, it says, "My soul cleaveth unto the dust, quicken thou me according to thy word." Again, he's asking to live. Psalm 119:37, "Turn my eyes away from beholding vanity, and quicken thou me in thy way." Verse 40, "Behold, I have longed after thy precepts, quicken me in thy righteousness." In verse 50, "This is my comfort in my affliction, for thy word hath quickened me." In verse 77, "Let thy tender mercies come unto me, that I may live, for thy law is my delight." In verse 88, "Quicken me after thy loving kindness, so shall I keep the testimony of thy mouth." Verse 93, I will never forget thy precepts, for with them thou hast quickened me. Verse 107, I am afflicted very much. Quicken me, O Lord, according unto thy word. Verse 116, uphold me according unto thy word, and that I may live, and let me not be ashamed of my hope. Verse 144 is our one today. The righteousness of thy testimonies is everlasting. Give me understanding, and I shall live. Upcoming verses are, hear my voice according unto thy loving kindness, O Lord. Quicken me according to thy judgment. 154, verse 154, plead my cause and deliver me. Quicken me according to thy word. Verse 156, great are thy tender mercies, O Lord. Quicken me according to thy judgments. Verse 159, consider how I love thy precepts. Quicken me, O Lord, according to thy loving kindness. And then the last time he says it, in verse 175, which will actually be in the top section, let my soul live, and it will praise thee, and let thy judgments help me. Oh, man. You get the idea that this word was a significantly huge word for King David. In this psalm is so much about this concept of being made alive through the tree of life. And this verse just illustrates it so absolutely beautifully. And so I hope you're like me, that I remember when I actually understood, right? So you see, as for Bina, that idea of the Hebrew word Bina, for understanding, like if we could understand what the word says, we will see that ever since the beginning, it's been talking about Jesus and that he would die on this tree to make us right. And I remember, that this passage in Genesis had everything to do with me coming to that understanding as I read in Job and realized I wasn't God. And then I read in the New Testament that, wow, Jesus would bring life, and it's spiritual life. And that's what comes from the tree of life. Like, man, oh man, oh man. So, you know what? I think in all our lives, as we get understanding of what the word actually says, of course, thy righteousness, the righteous one, is everlasting. Oh my goodness. And when we take on his righteousness, it is everlasting, and we live forever. It's clearly what the psalmist wants, and not just life, but life abundantly, life in his presence, right? Is fullness of joy, which we get to do only because his blood covers us, so that we can hang out in his righteousness, right? It wasn't by anything that we did. It was by what he did that we get to spend eternity in his righteousness. I mean, this whole idea of the Zadok is just so clearly comes to this miracle verse to go, okay, here's our opportunity, guys. We're going to be made right. And we get to spend eternity in life, and life abundantly, again, because of his righteousness. Thank you for listening.